Welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That is Xan. That is Gonzo. I am Shoob. And today we are here to do Big 12 win totals. Let's go. Part 1 here, we're going to be covering Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF, and Baylor. The rest will be covered in Part 2. But for now, we're going to start with the big boys at the top of the conference. Are you guys ready for this?
Let's get it. When I looked at this being 8.5, I said to myself, no way and no how. That is an easy under. But then I opened my handy dandy notebook and I did a little bit of research. I did a little bit digging.
The Texas Longhorns, a team that perennially underachieves. Are you telling me they are going to go 10-2 or are they going to go 8-4?
Get the dang police out there, because it's going to be animal cruelty what they're going to put this Buffalo through this season. Thank God that certain things are legal in Colorado, because you're going to need a lot of that to watch this team.
All right, starting here at the top, the Texas Longhorns sitting with a win total of 9.5 wins. They are in their final season here in the Big 12. I feel like this conference in general, it's kind of a weird time. This is like that weird transition year where, you know, you broke up with your ex, you guys have long separated, but there's still like a month left on the lease, and you've already got your new girlfriend coming in and living with you, but the ex is still just kind of there for that one extra month. So it's just kind of like that one awkward year where everybody's in together. But anyhow, Texas comes in as the favorite to win this conference with a line of 9.5 wins, and there's no shortage of hype. Seems like another year, another dollar here with Texas. So the Longhorns went 8-5 last year. This is Steve Sarkisian's third season at the helm at Texas, a big improvement over his first season where Texas went 5-7. The offense last year, the offense was pretty good. They were 18th overall in offensive efficiency. Quarterback Quinn Ewers returns for his second season as the starter. Last year was a roller coaster. You had the ups like the Alabama game and the downs like the Oklahoma State game and the TCU game. He just was very unpredictable, very inconsistent, and it seems like Quinn Ewers kind of over the course of the season, I feel like he kind of underwhelmed relative to what his expectations were. Of course, Texas lost Hudson Card to Purdue, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the QB room is stacked, because it is stacked. They have Malik Murphy, who apparently they did a lot of good work here with the fine NIL dollars to have him stay, because Malik Murphy is certainly capable of starting at a lot of other Power 5 schools. And then, of course, Arch Manning, I'm sure you may have heard of him. If you haven't, then I think you probably have been living under a rock for a long time. But this quarterback room is stacked with a ton of talents. Total yards per play last year, I think this is something that many Texas fans, maybe you guys, find a little bit surprising. Guess what the difference was in yards per play between Hudson Card and Quinn Ewers last year? Do you think it was more than a yard per play, or do you think it was less than a yard per play?
Less.
I'll go less as well.
It was more. So believe it or not, Hudson Card averaged 7.79 yards per play, Ewers 6.64. A little bit of a big difference there. Hudson Card was a pretty good player when he came in relief. But anyways, let's move on to the running back room. Texas, of course, loses Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson to the draft. I mean, what a stacked running back duo they had last year. They combined for 297 out of the team's 410 total rushing attempts, which was 72% of the team total, which is a lot. I think just losing both guys there, that's a huge step back at running back. But the rest of the offensive skill positions are stacked. Their top three receivers statistically from last year all return: Xavier Worthy, Jatavian Sanders, Jordan Whittington. And that's not to mention they add 98 grade 5-star transfer Adonai Mitchell from Georgia. And then he's not a transfer, but he feels like he's an addition because he was hurt all last year. Isaiah Nayer is finally healthy. He was a 4-star transfer a couple of years ago coming over from Wyoming. This receiver room is absolutely loaded with talent. Absolutely loaded. Other than Ohio State, this is the best receiver room in the country, easily. The offensive line was very solid last year, 31st in the country in line yards. They have 66% snap continuity year over year, which is tied for the second most in the Big 12. Snap continuity basically means the percentage of snaps that the offensive lineman projected to start this year, that's how many snaps they played last year. So if you didn't know, that's a good thing. 66% means the offensive line probably is going to be better than it was last year. I really like their tackles, Kelvin Banks and Christian Jones, but I think guard play could, has a little bit of room for improvement. And then the defense. The defense was pretty much better than the offense last year, which I feel like a lot of casual fans probably wouldn't expect, at least in terms of efficiency. They were 11th overall last year in schedule adjusted defensive efficiency, a big, big improvement from 2021 under defensive coordinator Pete Kwiatkowski. They do return 6 out of 11 starters, and they gave up the second least yards per play in the Big 12 last year. So the defense low-key was actually pretty good. It was better in terms of efficiency than the offense, which I feel like a lot of people would not have guessed. So the defensive line, top 30 in run stuffing rates, but they were outside the top 100 in sack rates. It's very weird disparity there, but I feel like there's a lot of teams that have similar disparities in this conference. I feel like that's dependent on quarterback play. They lose Coburn and Ajomo on the interior to the draft, but they return Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat, who both graded as top 5 defensive tackles in the Big 12. They are a little bit weaker on the edge, but still a solid defensive line. At linebacker, they lose Overshone to the draft, but Jalen Ford returns as a solid player. And then the secondary, they have 2 new transfer starters, Gavin Holmes from Wake Forest and Jalen Catalone, a safety coming over from Arkansas. And then I also like their safety, Jaron Thompson, who was graded as a top 100 player by PFF last year. So this team definitely is loaded with star talent and potential. That is to say the least. But let's take a look here at the schedule. The schedule is where the money is made here when we do these win totals. The non-conference play, of course, the big one is at Alabama in week 2. That's going to make or break the season, in my opinion, for Texas. Well, not really. They could still lose that game and totally run the rest of the Big 12 and win the Big 12 championship. But that Alabama game, that's a huge measuring stick. Everybody's going to be watching that game. That's going to be a big one. I'm pretty high on Texas's chances to win that game, in my opinion. I think that game is certainly very winnable for Texas, and I think they obviously beat Rice and Wyoming. And then we go into Big 12 conference play. Texas did not get the fairest draw, in my opinion, their final season here in the Big 12. The Big 12 definitely said, we're going to fire our best bullets at you on your way out the door. They draw Oklahoma, of course. They got to play Kansas State at TCU, and then they play Texas Tech, a few of the other top teams in the Big 12 going into this year. So all in all, when I look at this schedule and I look at the team objectively, to me, the X factor is obviously Quinn Ewers. He's the key to success here. He definitely has another level to unlock with his game, but he was just very inconsistent last year. You look at the games last year against like Oklahoma State and TCU where Ewers couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I mean, I don't know what happened. And in that game, especially the Oklahoma State game, Texas still scored like 35 points, even with Ewers not even be able to hit, anything in sight. So it just goes to show if Ewers just takes that next step, I mean, there's no limit for this offense. The defense should be very good again. I think potentially could be even better than last year. When I look at this team, man, the bottom line is there's just no excuses. There's no excuses. This is the best team on paper in the Big 12. Everybody and their mother had Texas as a top 10 team last year in their power ratings. For me, this line's sitting at 9.5. 10 to 11 wins seems like it's in the cards for me. I specifically have my numbers at 10.5 wins for Texas, but of course it's Texas. So you never know. They're favored in all 12 games. Believe it or not, according to my numbers, I actually have them as a very slight favorite over Alabama. I know not many other people have that, but I have them favored in all 12. They were 2-5 in one possession games last year, man. I know many of you have heard the intro video. The Texas Longhorns, a team that perennially underachieves. Are they going to go 10-2 or are they going to go 9-3? Boys, I think the Texas Longhorns are going to be over 9.5 wins. I am playing the upside. I know it is Texas. I know that, but everything else on paper just screams this team has a ton of upside and can win double-digit games in the regular season.
I reiterate a lot of the points that you made, Shub. Very, very good. I mean, look at this: 31st in line yards, 25th sack rate. They had a good offensive line, and they're returning basically all their key players last year. I think that only improves. Texas, I mean, just an incredible team, man. And like you say, Quinn Ewers definitely just needs to take that next step. And if he doesn't, Texas has a lot of depth at the QB position, so they're in more than a good spot than they were last year, say when Ewers went down against Alabama, which they arguably would have won that game had Ewers not gone down. So that just shows the kind of potential that this Texas team has. The fact that they were basically had Alabama on the ropes. Um, Now, you did mention the running back losses, but they also still have Jonathan Brooks and Jaden Blue. It won't be as good as a running attack as it was last year, but it still will be quite formidable as those guys were highly recruited out of high school. You mentioned all the great wide receivers that they have, but they also have Jordan Whittington and then that five-star Jonte Cook, who is definitely going to play. Word is he has been killing it in camp, and he's just been burning Texas starting corners, and he's only a true freshman. So Texas is just even more stacked. And then they lost a really good wide receiver in Brennan Thompson to OU, but it doesn't even matter because they're so stacked. It's not even going to hurt them. It doesn't even remotely phase them. I have nothing else to really add about the O-line. I think you nailed it. I agree. The guard play is probably their weakness, but overall, they're still going to be a very, very stout unit. I mean, in terms of defense, man, Ryan Watts returns. They have Jade Barron. They got those Egyptians in the portal that you alluded to. Their secondary is going to be good, man. Their secondary is going to be really good. They just got a five-star true freshman in Anthony Hill, and they returned Jalen Ford in the middle level for the linebackers. The linebackers are going to be really good. I mean, they may have lost Moro Ojomo, but again, you mentioned the returning production on the D-line. I really love Texas. 26th in defensive line yards, 59th on sack rate on passing downs. Really good. And so that's something that just bodes so well. And I'm with you, Shub. I really do have Texas. I think Texas beats Alabama this year. I think they match up very well against Alabama. Alabama has a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position too. I think it's a perfect recipe for Texas to beat Alabama. I've got Rice a win, Alabama a probable but a favorite to win for Texas. Wyoming win, Baylor win, Kansas win, OU win, bye week, Houston win. BYU, I feel like can be tricky because they're going to be riding their high horse at that point in time, and BYU is a very well coached team. So if BYU is one of those teams that they're very weird. They could beat anyone but also lose to anyone. So I feel like BYU, Kansas State, TCU, that little stretch right there could produce a loss. And then Iowa State, Texas Tech. I think Iowa State's a win, but maybe Tech gets them. But even if that happens, man, I think 10, 11 wins is very, very easily in the cards, maybe even 12-0. So I'm anywhere from 10 to 12 wins for Texas coming out of the season. I'm on the over. I think it's a very, very comfortable over because even with injuries, Texas is so deep, man. They are so deep that even their second level of players are still better than most of the starting groups in the Big 12. So, I mean, I think this could be a college football playoff kind of year for Texas.
Boy, the hype train, man. A lot of people are listening to this and shaking their heads right now because everybody says this about them every year. But
I know.
Gonzo, what do you have on the horns?
Fellas, excellent analysis. Y'all covered this roster top to bottom. A roster that boasts 8 5-stars, by the way, based on what recruiting services you use. And also some of those are unanimous 5-stars across all the services. Regarding coaching changes, they've only had to change their wide receiver coach with Chris Jackson, which is a very kind of menial coaching change that's been made. And I'm under on the horns down, but
Ooh, boy,
it's tough. This roster is absolutely loaded. And I think this, for me, I form this opinion based on schedule. And this is factoring out Alabama because I'm with y'all that I think they can go into Tuscaloosa and win that game. Absolutely. I just have a higher opinion on some of the teams they'll be facing. I think going to Baylor is a tough assignment for them. Baylor has beaten them in the past, and under Dave Aranda, that's a team that's always going to fight hard. Kansas is usually a cakewalk, but Kansas beat them in Austin 2 years ago. So you can't really count Kansas as a guaranteed win. And I'm also still higher on Kansas than I would be in probably the last 25 years. Jumping down to the schedule, a couple games after the bye, Kansas State at home, having that game at home is huge, but I definitely think they can't sleepwalk into that game, especially after playing BYU the week before and having TCU on the road, keep in mind, following the K-State game. And I know it's a new TCU team. We'll get into that. You know, they've lost a lot of pieces, but still having to go into Fort Worth to play a rival will be difficult. Then they will beat Iowa State, though Iowa State did give them a heart attack last year. And I remember it was Iowa State was a couple of drop passes away from winning that game. And then I'll kind of show a little bit of my cards. I'm high on Texas Tech this year, and even though it's going to be in Austin, that by no means is a guaranteed win. And in fact, the Red Raiders beat the Longhorns last year, so this is an absolute lean under for me. I think at most I see a 9-3 season as the floor, but you guys have hit it on the head. This is a team that can go to the college football playoff. I don't think can win a national championship, but can definitely go to college football playoff, win the Big 12. I want to reiterate that I do think this is a good team, but I just think
But
that
it's
9
Texas.
wins is Texas, and I think that 9 wins is just maybe more likely than double digits based on the scheduling.
I mean, Gonzo, that has been their history. I mean, no matter how good they look on paper, they have always found a way to lose some games they should not lose. And we're sitting there like, how did that even happen? But I don't know, man. This roster just seems different to me personally. I mean, it just seems stacked on too many levels to. Well, let's just say this: if they can't win the Big 12 with this roster, good luck in the SEC. Sark's not your guy.
Yeah, exactly. That was why I said there's just no excuses. There's just absolutely no excuses. There's no reason for Texas not to win the Big 12 with the difference in talent of this roster versus the rest of the field. I mean, we covered it. You heard us talk. Every single objective metric says Texas is a really good team, a team that has top 5 college football playoff potential. The only reason you would not be high on this team is because of just that it's Texas. That's the only reason. Even if Queen Ewers continues to be kind of meh, they're still going to be pretty damn good, you know?
I want to give one example, and this is probably more so the exception than the rule, but I do remember everyone was high on a good old rival of Texas, Texas A&M. The roster was there, everything seemed to be there, and the wheels absolutely came off. Now, again, I do not think that will happen with Texas, but because that happened with A&M, that unfortunately is a realm of possibility that could exist. Now, I trust me, I don't think it's going to be what happened to A&M last year, but even with the talent on paper looking good, college football is a very weird sport, and that is all I will say. There.
Hey, no, I don't disagree with you one bit there. But I think it's time to move on a little bit up north to Norman here, up the Red River, across the Red River, I should say. The Oklahoma Sooners come in with a win total of 9.5. A little bit of a rough year for Venables in year one. Xan, take us away on the Sooners.
So the Sooners are an interesting team this year. They're definitely portal winners this year, I would say, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But let's look at them last year. Offensive efficiency 27th, defensive efficiency 45th, line yards 7th, sack rate 67th. Overall, they're a pretty solid team, but they're not the Oklahoma teams that we are accustomed to seeing in years past under Lincoln Riley, Bob Stoops, et cetera, et cetera. This seems like a different type of era where I personally don't view them as that same type of powerhouse. Like, yes, they still have a talented roster. Yes, they're still a talented team. But can Venables be the guy to put those pieces together? That's the real question here. So when we break down the offense here, we have quarterback Dillon Gabriel, who I feel like a lot of people still sleep on and don't really give him a lot of credit. I hear a lot of people say he's a very average QB, which just, I mean, the stats don't really support that. I mean, at 3,200 yards, 25 touchdowns, 6 picks, good ratios, good numbers. He's a solid QB, absolutely. And then they have Jackson Arnold, the 5-star in waiting. So they are definitely in a good spot at the quarterback position. That gives them some added depth just because of that. Look at the running backs. They lost Eric Gray, yes, but you know OU, they reload at running back. They're a school that historically produces good running backs. They've got Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk over there, and I think those two will take over and be able to replace that production for Eric Gray. They lost Marvin Mims to the NFL. But, good old Austin Stogner, after leaving OU, returns right back home to play that tight end position. And he's definitely an impactful player, especially when he was at OU. We talked about how Brennan Thompson transferred away from Texas and will now be joining the Sooners as well. And I think he will be a very impactful player for the Sooners. He is lightning quick. And then I'm not really high on the combo of Jalil Farouk and Drake Stoops. Now, I understand that they're pretty good possession receivers, especially Drake Stoops, but they're not, those prolific, blow the top off kind of guys that really make your offense explode. But definitely Drake Stoops is a good possession receiver. But other than that, they're not really guys that just make your offense elite. So we'll see. We'll see with this team. I think their offense may take a step back, but it just depends on Brennan Thompson, honestly. I think he's definitely a great addition. They lost their tackles, Anton Harrison and Wanya Morris, to the NFL. That's always a big loss. But they got offensive guard Caleb Schaefer from Miami of Ohio and tackle Walter Roos from Stanford. We make a video about that, kind of covering that whole situation. And OU is one of those teams that typically does produce good offensive lines year in and year out. They recruit that position really well. So perhaps even though they've lost some production there, they can still produce a pretty respectable offensive line. And I do expect them to put together a pretty respectable offensive line, but maybe not as good as it was last year. So that's how I feel about the offense. When I look over at the defense here, they've got some returning guys. Woody Washington, who was a pretty good player, but he's not really, he's good in coverage, but he's not really a good run stopper. They got safety Billy Bowman returning, excellent against the run and the pass, and then Reggie Pearson from Texas Tech. So definitely things that I really I definitely like that they have some returning production in their secondary there. I think that bodes pretty well for them. And then they did lose a cornerback, Jaden Davis, to Miami. Overall, I don't think it's going to hurt them that much. Looking at the next level of their defense, the linebackers, they lost to Sean White, but they also got Deshaun McCullough from Indiana. And, I think linebacker will be one of the weaker groups in their defense, but ultimately I think they're still going to be a pretty solid unit. They lost Derek LeBlanc to UCF on the defensive line, but they also got Rondell Bothroyd, which is a huge pickup for them. A very good player from Wake Forest who I think is going to really be impactful. They got Devon Sears from Texas State, who is going to provide really good depth for Jordan Kelly, who's also a really good run stuffer. I really like both those players. I mean, in their defense last year, considering that we're returning these players, was 5th in defensive line yards. They are really good at pushing offensive lines back. And pass down sacks, they were 61st. So they could stand to improve on their pass rush, but I think Rondell Bothroyd is definitely going to help with that. So I think we could definitely see some improvement. And then also Ethan Downs. I can't believe I forgot about Ethan Downs. He's an all Big 12 player and preseason all Big 12, and he's returning off the edge as well. So we definitely got a decent team here with the OU Sooners. My only thing here is look at the schedule, man. This is why the Sooners line is so high. Am I high on the Sooners thinking that they're a team that would generally merit, a 10-win season? Probably not, but their schedule is pretty favorable. Arkansas State, most likely a W. SMU, probably a W. Tulsa, Cincy, Iowa State, they're probably starting 5-0. Then they go play Texas in the Red River Shootout. I think they lose to Texas. They get the bye week, come play UCF at home. And because it's at home and off a bye week, I think they can handle UCF. But then they go at Kansas. That one gets a little dicey. I think they'll win that one. Then they go at Oklahoma State. That's a win every year. And then they play West Virginia, which for some reason, West Virginia always gives them fits. Always gives them fits. So that one's a probable. I think BYU is a probable. I think TCU is a probable. But even despite their schedule, guys, for some reason, I'm just not that big of a believer in Brent Venables. I don't know why. And for that reason, I think 10-2 is likely, but I think 9-3 is more likely. I'm going under on the Sooners. I think their 9-10 wins, 9.5 is perfectly pegged by the sports books, but I am going to ride with the under, and that OU is going to lose a game they really shouldn't lose, and it's going to kind of ruin their total.
Fantastic analysis as always, Xan. I just wanted to come in and highlight a couple more personnel pieces for the Sooners. So for me, when looking at this total, I knew I was going to have to go one way or the other. I'm going to be an over with OU. Let me start in the quarterback room. A big component for me is the Jeff Lebby, Dylan Gabriel relationship. This is year 3. This is the show me the ring year, if we're using dating metaphors. I'm very interested to see how a healthy Dylan Gabriel does with Jeff Levy, with year 2 of Venables being able to put the system in place. In regards to the toys he gets to play with, I know you said you weren't too I guess more so impressed with just Farouk and Stoops coming back. For what it's worth, at least Farouk was the leading receiver in regards to receiving yards and touchdowns. And like you said, Drake Stoops, who it feels like he's been with the program since we were in college. He comes back and gives both that veteran leadership as well as being a good possession guy. I do think the tight end role is going to have a little bit of a hole. I mean, you get Stogner back after he played played for Beamer for a year for South Carolina, but they lose Willis and Parker, and then they bring in Blake Smith from A&M. We got Cade McIntyre, a couple other returning pieces. I think tight end might be a difficult position for the Sooners to utilize this season. For the O-line, you can never count out a unit that is coached by Bill Bedenbaugh. Even in a down year, you alluded to this, they were 7th nationally in line yards. They always put out good linemen and good fronts to protect their quarterback. And I also think that Troy Everett coming in from Appalachian State, that's a kid who was an All-American. He'll provide some depth on the line. To highlight just a couple transfers who came in, more so in the secondary, Kendall Doby, he's coming in from Northeast Oklahoma A&M, where at the JUCO level, he was the Southwest Junior College Football Conference Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, number 1 JUCO recruit in Oklahoma. So that's going to help shore up the secondary. And also, let's see if 5-star Peyton Bowen gets in the action there at safety as well. It'll be really interesting to see if he gets some early playing time for the Sooners. And what really helps me formulate this over for the Sooners is the schedule. I think they got a better draw than Texas. I got 4 straight wins out the gate. They probably beat Iowa State, but Iowa State historically has given them troubles in the past. So probably a win. Texas, I do not see them beating Texas. I just don't. I had that as a bona fide loss. But then after they get to lick their wounds from the Texas game, really, in my opinion, the only 2 debatable games I see, funny enough, are at Kansas, which they will probably beat Kansas. But again, I'm higher on Kansas this year. And then TCU to conclude the season. Though I do acknowledge your point that West Virginia has been a thorn in the Sooner side. And I do think that's a game actually worth maybe me reevaluating as one where the Sooners could trip up. But even with a Texas loss, I still see this Sooner team rebounding in year 2 under Venables and leaving the Big 12 on a good note. So I at least have 10 wins for Boomer Sooner this season.
Man, so you guys are pretty confident that OU has no shot at beating Texas and Red River? I mean, last time I checked, I don't think Davis Beville is going to start for the Sooners this year.
I will give him 0.
I think that helps.
But I like, just like we said earlier, from a talent perspective, Texas has the much better roster right now.
Oh, yeah, no, without a doubt. But I think Sooners fans are happy that they won't have to deal with Davis Beville. Like that was a nightmare last year. But anyways, this Sooner team, man, yeah, they were 6-7 last year, but they were a little bit better than what their record showed. They were 0-5 in 1 possession games. 0-5 last year. I mean, they just lost a bunch of close games. The only blowout loss was the aforementioned Red River loss. Dylan Gabriel as the starter, guys, like Xan said, I think he's underappreciated, but I think that's just because that's relative to what Oklahoma's had at quarterback in the past. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's had to fill in the shoes of a chain in command of Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams. Like, of course he's not on that level. He's still a very good, solid Power 5 quarterback. He's an easily above average starting quarterback in the Power 5. Guys, this is his 5th season as the starter. 5th season for Dylan Gabriel. That guy's got a ton of experience. He is a veteran. What I like about him is that you know what you're getting. He's extremely consistent. You know exactly what you're getting with Dylan Gabriel. It's not like he has got another level into a lock with his game. but you know that he's going to put up the same numbers that he has in his previous years as the quarterback. Arnold as the backup, that definitely helps because last year quarterback depth, as I briefly mentioned earlier, was a huge problem for OU. Hopefully Arnold will help alleviate those pains, but that's still an unknown. I mean, yeah, I've heard a ton of good things about Jackson Arnold, but I mean, he's still a true freshman. He hasn't played a single snap yet. That's not just a guarantee that he's going to be a competent backup quarterback. In my opinion, it doesn't really feel like the receiver room or the O-line didn't improve from last year. The defense, I think this is the unit that has the most upside for improvement if we're looking at this team, because you have 7 starters returning. They're getting time in Venable's system. So if I'm looking at this team, I don't really feel like the offense got better, but I feel like the defense has potential to get a lot better from year 1 to year 2 with Venables. So believe it or not, my number system is not very favorable. It's not very kind to the Sooners. My numbers, believe it or not, only have OU projected for 7.5 wins, which, yeah, I know that's pretty low. I don't think they're gonna only win 7.5 games, but I'm under here, guys. I know the schedule is very favorable. I think the schedule is gonna sort of mask this team's true talent level, in my opinion. I don't really think it's that much better of a team than, say, Kansas State or TCU or Texas Tech. The reason this win total is high is because OU got a really, really light schedule. But even with the schedule, I'm going under. I think 3 losses are in the cards. I'm with you guys. I think Texas very likely is a loss. I don't chalk up TCU as a win, even though that game's at home. At Kansas, I could see as a potential loss. A lot of these other teams, I don't really feel like they're head and shoulders better. I think those are games that OU is the better team and they should probably win those games, but it's not like I'm going to those games thinking, oh yeah, OU for sure is going to win those games. I don't see it this year, and I'm with you. I don't know if Venables is the guy. I was not impressed by last year. I don't know if he might be in over his head as a head coach. Like, that just might be the case. Like, is there going to be a huge year 2 jump? I mean, yeah, the schedule might help a lot, but I think 3 losses are in the cards here. I'm not very high on this team. And if I'm wrong about this, it's going to be because the defense took a big jump.
Well, let's take a look over at Kansas State, a team who won the Big 12 championship last year. Gonzo, what is your take on the reigning Big 12 champions?
For the reigning Big 12 champions, I was very happy to see this win total drop because I am over on the Wildcats. Let's get into the personnel. You got Will Howard coming back. He had a PFF grade of 75, which that sounds average, but when compared to other quarterbacks in the Big 12, it's a fairly decent grade. So you got him coming back with that veteran experience. I mean, he was the one at the helm when they made this late season push to win the conference. And even though, the Sugar Bowl didn't turn out how they wanted to, I mean, he still played fine. The running back room, you do lose Deuce Vaughn to the NFL. He was fantastic for the Wildcats the last couple of years, but they were able to supplement a bit in the transfer portal, bringing in Trayshawn Ward from Florida State. He was the second leading rusher for the Seminoles last year. So you pair him with DJ Giddens, and I think you can somewhat make up the production that Deuce was responsible for. You lose a bit from the receiving core. Malik Knowles was awesome, and he's gone. Kurt Warner's son, Cade, he's off to the NFL. And then you also lose Sammy Wheeler at tight end, but you still got guys like Xavier Lloyd and RJ Garcia II on the outside. And then they brought in Keegan Johnson from Iowa. So I'm intrigued to see an Iowa receiver in a competent offense and what he can do. That could be a hidden gem there for the Wildcats. And they've also got just a bunch of freshmen waiting in the wings, which I don't see as a deterrent. I see that as potential gems to be mined to see who can step up and help supplement some of these losses. Another big reason why I'm high on this over is you got the entire offensive line returning along with the depth to complement these pieces. And then you've got headlining this offensive line. You got Cooper Beebe. This is a redshirt senior. He's got All-American projections. He graded out very well with Pro Football Focus over 80, which is just fantastic as a left guard. So switching now to the line defensively, losing Uzoma to the NFL along with Huggins and 2 depth pieces to graduation is going to create some voids to be filled. But they went into the portal and brought Javon Banks from Mississippi State, and he got some playing time over there, so he should come in and be able to contribute, and also complement Brendan Mott and Nate Matlack on that defensive line. For the linebacking core, you got the whole squad coming back, and they're all redshirt seniors with 2 reserves as well as 2 JUCO studs. Terry Kirksey from Hutchinson, he was an honorable mention All-American, and then I love this name, Rex Van Y from Iowa Central Community College. He was a JUCO All-American as well. So now going to the secondary, that's where finally we got to come a little bit down from Cloud 9. They lose Brent, Boydoy, Hayes, Cheatham, all gone. You lost a couple depth pieces. VJ Payne as the only returning starter, with Jacob Parrish coming in to start in that other role. So they're really going to need their transfers to shine. They got Siegel and Noam at cornerback, who had significant playing time at North Dakota State and Southeast Missouri State, respectfully. And then Will Lee from Iowa Western Community College. He was a JUCO All-American. So even though they didn't go from Power 5 schools to bring in this crop of transfers, they brought in dudes who absolutely balled out at their level of football. And I'm going to be very intrigued to see if they can bring this level to the Big 12 and help the Cats repeat. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the schedule. So I think they opened 4-0 out the gate, especially when they got to go to Missouri. I have no reason to think that they will not beat the Tigers again. So you get on those 4, you get a bye. Oak State is a tough draw, especially when you got to go to Stillwater. But I think having the bye there is what's going to help push the Cats over. So they start 5-0. Then gets a little dicey at Texas Tech. Could lose that one potentially. TCU, they probably win it because it's in Manhattan. But taking those out, then they get Houston. I'm not as high on Houston. I think they beat Houston. They go to Texas, probably a loss. Then they host Baylor. I think they beat Baylor. Kansas on the road is a toss-up. That's going to be a heck of a sunflower showdown. I'm really looking forward to that when that time comes late in November. And then Iowa State for Senior Day, I do think they win that. So the fact that this went from 8 to now 7.5, I think with the schedule, I think with these returners, I think the Wildcats at least can win 8 games. I don't know if they repeat and win the conference, but an 8-4 season, I absolutely think is in the cards for Kansas State.
Yeah, I reiterate a lot of the points you said, Gonzo. I like this team a lot, actually, and I love Chris Kleiman as a coach. I think one big thing about this team going into this year is that they were able to retain Colin Klein as the offensive coordinator. Apparently, Klein flirted with Notre Dame, but Kansas State was able to retain him, which was big, very big. Colin Klein turned out to be a pretty good play caller last year. The running back room, I mean, I just want to reiterate that I love the running back room. In fact, I know, and I loved Deuce Vaughn last year. So let me preface that first here, but I kind of think the guys that they have this year are going to be a lot better than Deuce Vaughn. DJ Giddens and Trayshawn Ward from FSU. They were both graded higher than Vaughn by PFF last year, so take that as you will. Also, the hard stats, they were just as good as Vaughn, if not better, in yards per attempt, I should say. So I think this running back room is actually going to be better than it was last year, but that's not to take away from Deuce Vaughn. And then, yeah, as far as the schedule, the non-conference play, I would be a little bit worried about the Missouri game. I actually think Missouri is going to be an improved team going into next year, but it is at Missouri too. So I know they beat Missouri pretty good last year. They did get a lot of turnovers in that game, but that's not one that I would just be, yeah, that's a guaranteed win. I think K-State's got to be on their A game to make sure they pull that one out. And I agree with you. Yeah, the first half of the schedule is sort of light. This isn't a team that I don't think will necessarily win 10 or 11 games in the regular season. I'd be pretty surprised if they pull that off again. But I think that this is a 8 or 9 win team in the regular season. I'm very confident about that. I'm surprised that the line has dipped all the way down here to 7.5. I'm over. I think that this is an 8 to 9 win regular season team. I'm pretty high on them. I think that the offensive line can take a really big jump this year. I think it could be the best offensive line in the Big 12. I already mentioned the running back room. I love Will Howard. One concern I have, though, is probably the lack of depth behind Howard at quarterback. So if there is an injury to him, it's not like last year where they had Adrian Martinez.
They have Jake Rubley.
They do have Jake Rubley, but I think last year they definitely benefit from having two really good quarterbacks who could both play. So it is a slight concern for me. And then the receiver room lacks a little bit of experience in the depth in the back end there. And then the other concern would just be the secondary, maybe. I think the secondary could be a little bit worse than it was last year. I mean, it was the strength of this defense last year, but if the secondary is still holds up just fine, I mean, I see no reason why this team is not going to win 8 or 9 games.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things you guys said. I mean, Kansas State, the biggest thing for me is just how well coached they are. You brought up Colin Klein, how they're able to retain him. Great. Chris Kleiman, excellent coach. I mean, just development and coaching. That is like the MO for Kansas State, a team that is not notorious for being an elite recruiter, but really just getting the most out of their talent. I love it, man. Quarterback, running back, 100% with you. Love that situation. Good offensive line. Their offense is going to be quite formidable. I know they lost a lot, but they also returned Phillip Brooks at wide receiver, who had about 600 yards in production last year. So they've got some guys coming back, and they got some transfers that might be able to supplement some of what they lost. So I'm definitely excited for Kansas State. I think they have a lot of potential on the offensive side of the ball this year. And I'm with you, Shoob. I think even more so, they've got a 1-2 that I think will be more productive than Deuce Vaughn as a 1. So I do like that 1-2 combo that they have. On defense, guys, I mean, the secondary is going to take a massive step back this year. It just has to. They lost 2 guys to the NFL, and then we didn't even mention that they lost their safety, Sincere Mason, who was absolutely excellent in pass coverage. He was basically their best safety in pass coverage. And so that's 3 guys who were all great in pass coverage that are gone off this team. So yes, you supplement with some portal guys, but ultimately they're losing way more than they're bringing in. Not to mention on the D-line, they lost Huggins and Onaduke Uzoma. I mean, there is a lot of loss on the defense this year. Not to mention the defensive line, even with all those guys, was 104th in defensive line yards and 80th in pass down sack rate. So this team right here, I think it's going to be one of those teams, like one of those old school Big 12 teams from like 10 years ago, where they're just an offensive powerhouse, but their defense is going to be like suspect. I think they're well coached, so they'll be able to patch up some of those holes, but there's just no way that they don't regress defensively from where they were last year. I just can't see it. They do return Austin Moore, who is a pretty solid linebacker, but the rest of that unit doesn't really impress me that much. There's still something to be proven from the rest of that unit. So the defense is my biggest concern. Now, when we look at the schedule, Southeast Missouri, Troy, Mizzou, with you guys, 3-0 on that. I think UCF is a probable. And because UCF has a mobile quarterback and they have some good production returning at wide receiver. So I think with the potential secondary issues that Kansas State has and the D-line, a massive loss to their D-line, a mobile quarterback who has guys to throw to, I think that could spell disaster for K-State. That could be a bad matchup just based on personnel. And so I think UCF is a probable. I think UCF is one that could really sneak up on them there. They get the bye week. They go to Oklahoma State. I think they handle Oklahoma State pretty easily. I don't think that one's close. Then they take on Texas Tech, which is another probable because Texas Tech is a quality team as well. And then they take on TCU. Even though it's at home, again, just based on the personnel, I think it's a poor matchup for them. I think TCU is going to win that game. I would definitely favor TCU in that. Then they've got Houston, which I think is a probable at Texas. I give them a probable at Texas. Baylor, probable. At Kansas, I think they win the Sunflower Showdown, and I think they win against Iowa State. Assuming they don't lose all their probables, this team's winning at least 8 games. Give me the over on the Kansas State Wildcats.
All right, 3-way consensus and on Kansas State at 7.5 wins. You love to see it. We think that the Wildcats going to be a pretty solid team this year. I think the front 6, I think the defensive line and the linebackers are still going to be solid. I really don't think – I had in my notes that I actually think that the D-line and the linebacker room could improve a little bit, if anything, from last year. But I guess we'll see. But I think either way, we're all pretty high on Kansas State.
All of their highest rated guys are gone. On all their most proven guys are gone. So I just don't know how. But they are a well-coached team. So it is possible they're able to at least have a very respectable defense. But the secondary is the issue, man. So a lot of these teams, a lot of these teams have good quarterbacks and good wide receiver production. And those are the teams that they're not going to match up well against. And that's a concern for me.
All right. Moving on here. Another team in purple. This team in purple, it was a team that went on a ride for the ages last year. I just want to say, as a non-TCU fan, as just a diehard college football fan, I think I lived vicariously through TCU. I think we all lived vicariously through TCU last year while doing this podcast. It was very fun to cover the Horned Frogs run last year. This team made the national championship, guys. I mean, I just want to say, like, to all you TCU fans out there, little clap, tip of the cap, because that wasn't impressive what they were able to accomplish last year. I think a lot of people just overlook the fact that they got blown out by Georgia, but like, it doesn't matter, guys. Like, the fact that TCU just made the national championship game, like, that was huge. That's something that a program like TCU has a very hard time accomplishing. So I just want to say it was an incredible season last year. They beat Michigan in the semifinal game. So I think a lot of Michigan fans seem to forget that. But anyways,
And
just
Shoob,
round of applause to TCU.
can we just acknowledge that there are less than a handful of teams that would not have lost by 30 points to Georgia in the national championship?
Yeah, I think, remember when Oregon played Georgia last year and lost by like 50 points in the first week of the season? It's like Georgia would have done that to almost everybody besides like Alabama or Ohio State. So I don't
look how good Tennessee was last year. They had no chance against Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but we're preaching to the choir here because we're speaking to the Horned Frog faithful. But anyways, it is time to give a deep dive analysis on the Horned Frogs. I am going to lead us off. This is, of course, Sonny Dykes' second season. And I mean, let's be real here. I gave you a round of applause, but let's be honest with ourselves here. I think it's pretty hard for TCU to live up to what they accomplished last year. So with that being said, I still think this team is going to be very solid. Last year, they were 14th overall in offensive efficiency, second in the Big 12 in yards per play. They had 5 players drafted off of this offense last year. It was a very good offense. And man, Sonny Dykes did a great job of developing and that talent that he retained over from Gary Patterson. There is a new offensive coordinator in town, Kendall Briles, the former Arkansas offensive coordinator. He replaces Garrett Riley, who went off to Clemson. Garrett Riley, considered one of the best OCs in the country. I will say, Kendall Briles, I know this is for you TCU fans, this probably leaves a little bad taste in your mouth. This hire seems very, very slimy, and I kind of agree with you there, so I don't blame you at all. But objectively, just as a play caller, like, Kendall Briles is good at his job. Like, he is a good play caller. But yeah, should he be probably coaching college football anymore like his dad? I don't think he should be, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, Max Duggan, the quarterback from last year, he is out. Chandler Morris, he is now the front runner in a quarterback battle with 6-year senior Chance Nolan, who made a post-spring transfer from Oregon State. They also have redshirt freshman Josh Hoover is in the mix, but it seems like Chandler Morris is probably the favorite to win that quarterback job. Chance Nolan, potentially, we'll see. As far as the running back room, there were big losses from last year in Kendre Miller and D Mercado. Those guys were great, but they have Imani Bailey returning, and then they got a transfer from Alabama, Trey Sanders, who take over at running back. As far as the receiving room, their top 3 receiving leaders from last year are out. The big one is, of course, Quentin Johnston. I mean, that's a first-round pick right there that they lost. That's pretty irreplaceable. They also lost Jordan Hudson, who transferred out to SMU, who was rated pretty highly on 247's transfer rating as a 4-star. And then they did get JoJo Earl from Alabama, JP Richardson from Oklahoma State, and then Jalen Robinson from Ole Miss. I've heard that John Paul Richardson's apparently looking really good in practice there. So I think that TCU did a pretty good job of supplementing the losses through the portal and the receiving room. And then tight end Jared Wiley. I can't forget to mention Jared Wiley. He was graded as the best tight end in the Big 12 last year by PFF. So that's a big, big returning piece there. The offensive line, they were slightly above average last year in line yards and sack rates. They have 72% snap continuity this year, which is number 3 in the Power 5 and number 1 in the Big 12. So the offensive line, pretty good bet to be even better than it was last year. That's a good sign. So let's move on over to the defense here. They were 25th overall in defensive efficiency. Defensive coordinator Joe Gillespie, he was a great hire. We were saying that on this podcast last year. We really liked that hire. They had 3 players drafted off of this defense, but they have 8 starters returning, which is pretty good. Defensive line last year, relatively mediocre when it comes to the line yards and sack rates. They lose Dylan Horton to the draft, but they have Dominic Williams and Caleb Fox, who are decent returning starters. Linebacker room returns a lot of experience and depth. I think the linebacker room will improve. And then the secondary, they lose cornerback Trevius Hodges-Tomlinson to the draft, but they do return a lot of solid players and experience. Josh Newton was great as the 3rd best corner in the Big 12. I love me some Josh Newton. They got Bud Clark, Abe Kamara returning as solid players. They also added Avery Helm, who's in the mix from Florida. And then their safeties, Miller Bradford and Mark Perry, both solid players. I mean, secondary, pretty solid, not necessarily a standout guy, but overall very solid secondary there. And then let's move on to the schedule here. Schedule non-con, I think they should be 3-0, but you can't really overlook SMU in my opinion. And by that, I mean, just don't play like complete crap and turn the ball over 4 times. You probably should beat SMU. But I think Nichols and Colorado, I know, Xan, you think Colorado actually has a chance to beat TCU. We covered that in Pac-12 win totals.
I think they have a chance to cover. I don't know about beat, but definitely cover.
Ooh, cover. Yeah, well, I don't really think Colorado has a chance to beat TCU personally, but other than that, as far as their Big 12 play, the back half of their Big 12 schedule is pretty tough. I mean, once you hit that at Kansas State game, you do get a bye week after that, which is very nice. That's going to be a very timely bye week. But then the back half there at Texas Tech, Texas, Baylor, at Oklahoma. I mean, that's tough. That's going to be where the money's made. That's going to make or break this TCU season. I could see this TCU team being like one of those teams that starts 7-0 or maybe 6-1. They're ranked really high, but then they finish like 2 or 3 or 3-2 in that final stretch there. I think it's going to be pretty hard for them to replicate exactly what they were able to do last season. My numbers have them projected for 7.8 wins. I have them favored in every game except at K-State, at Texas Tech, and Texas. So I have them favored in 9 out of 12 games. I think 8-4 is slightly more likely than 7-5. Give me an over for TCU.
Good point, Shoob. And my biggest thing before I really dove into TCU was just thinking about how much talent they lost from that team, that national championship team last year. Offensive tarp rating -7. And that usually spells regression. But the other big loss too was Garrett Riley. I mean, this team got absolutely gutted on the offensive side of the ball. But one thing you did mention, Chandler Morris. I think a lot of people forget Chandler Morris was named the starter week 1 for TCU. So I think he must be able to play to some extent here. And then Max Duggan just kind of took over from there. So Chandler Morris, that makes me think he's not a scrub and he's at least capable. He at least beat out Max Duggan in early camp. So he could definitely possess some good ability. You've already mentioned the running back room. I think the running back room will be pretty similar to what it was last year, or at least the production. Although it's not really proven with Sanders, although he was a former 5-star. The wide receiver losses are pretty significant, but again, I like what they supplemented in the portal, as you alluded to. They lost Steve Avila to the NFL on the offensive line. They lost their starting center, but they did return, Brandon Coleman, as you alluded to, best guy, and they brought in Patrick Willis in addition to other portal pieces. So I think the offensive line will still be solid, but I think they might be a little less good compared to last year, given that they lost 2 interior pieces. And then in terms of the secondary, I'm completely with you. I know they lost Hodges Tomlinson, but they retain a lot of very good pieces to their secondary. And, TCU is known for having good secondary pieces. They're always very well coached in the secondary. I think they will continue to thrive in that spot. They lost D. Winters, their best linebacker. But the good news is all of their projected starters are seniors. So those are guys, as we know with college football, juniors, seniors win games. They run the field unless you're one of those select 5-star programs that just get all the 5 stars. But for the most part, this sport is won and lost by juniors and seniors. Defensive line, 66 in defensive line yards, 93rd in passing down sack rate. They can stand to improve there, and I know they had some losses, but you did mention that they also had some very key returners, so I think it's going to play pretty well for at least their defensive line yards and their rush defense. So we'll see. They're definitely an interesting team. I don't think they're going to regress too mightily, Before I dove into this team, I thought there was going to be severe regression, but just based on what they did, I think they did a great job in the portal, so where they can still be very competitive, especially on the offensive end. And now let's dive into the schedule, man. I mean, Colorado, Nichols. I think they start out 2-0 at Houston. Could be a little tricky, but I have that probable favor to a win, though. SMU, West Virginia, Iowa State. Now, some of those games could be tricky, but I think they could honestly start 6-0. But then the back half of their schedule gets a little tougher. I think TCU is going to start 5-1 or 6-0. I could definitely see it. Then they got to go play BYU, which is a probable. BYU has a lot of good positions where they match up well against some of these Big 12 teams. And I think that's why I see BYU as a team that can come in and beat anyone, but also lose to anyone in the Big 12. They're kind of a wild card out there. At Kansas State, I think is a probable. Kansas State is at home, but as I mentioned, I think TCU has a good matchup in that game from a personnel standpoint, given that what Kansas State lost, they weren't able to replace the same way that TCU was, especially on the defensive end for Kansas State. So I do like TCU in that game. Then they get the bye week to prepare for Texas Tech, which is amazing. Late season, you're probably going to have some injuries. You get a very, very good bye week to prepare for Tech. And you have to go at Tech. That is not an easy place to play, especially if Tech is cooking by that point in the season. That place is going to be packed. So that is definitely a probable. But definitely TCU is blessed with that bye week. Then they got to go play Texas. That's going to be tough. Then they got to play Baylor. That's going to be tough. And then they got to play at OU. That's going to be tough. So I think TCU is going to start off this season pretty hot. I think in their first 7-8 games, they're going to be already kind of hot towards their win total, but then the L's are going to start piling up. But overall, I think they're going to steal enough. And I'm with you, Shoob. I have them pegged for 8-4. I'm on the TCU over. I think 8-4 is in the cards.
Excellent as always, boys. I remember when I was an undergrad, not even before that, when I was in high school, I looked at TCU and it was never super serious, but it was always a thought. And I'm not going to hide the ball. I'm over on these Horned Frogs. And I want to highlight 3 guys before I get into the schedule breakdown. In the wide receiver core, you got Jack Besh from Lafayette, Louisiana, who played 2 years here at LSU. I absolutely love this kid when he was at LSU. Unfortunately, injury derailed his sophomore year, and he also was the culprit in the ball off the foot that gave Georgia the weirdest pick 6, or at least an interception in that SEC championship. And I'm gonna give you a bold prediction right now. Jack Besh is gonna be the leading wide receiver on this team at the end of the year. So that's one thing. Second, on this offensive line that we've been lauding, I think another name to know just is Willis Patrick. And Mr. Patrick came from Jackson State, did not follow Dion, but he came here to TCU and he was a JUCO All-American. So he just provides even more depth to a TCU line that is going to be cohesive. For the schedule, for me, it's how the Horned Frogs do before the bye week. If they lose more than 2 games before this bye week, this total's cooked for me. Because in my mind, I have them off to a 5-0 start. You probably beat Iowa State, but again, Matt Campbell coaches those boys hard and they play hard, and they have to go into Ames. So probably a win, but not a cakewalk. And then I think they beat BYU. Kansas State's a bona fide loss for me. And then really this last 4, Xan, you alluded to this. It's really good that TCU has this bye week before Texas Tech, because this is just a gauntlet. You got to go to Lubbock and play a Red Raider team that could potentially be looking to seal the deal for a Big 12 title berth entering that last month. Then you got to go play Texas, and depending how that goes, it's probably going to be a loss. You then got to go and deal with Baylor and then finish it on the road against OU. That's just a tough way to end this season. But again, even with that rough last 4 for the schedule, I just think an 8-win season is more likely for these Horned Frogs. I don't think they get the championship hangover. I don't think this is a 6-6 squad or a non-bowl squad. They've got the coaching. They've got a great offensive coordinator coming in. Regardless of his past, he does the job well. So I'm interested to see what the drop-off is from him and Riley. And at minimum, like I said with Kansas State, I think 8-4 is more likely for these TCU Horned Frogs.
All right. Yeah. Sonny Dykes made it a point in spring ball to say we're not going to be hungover from last year. That's the big theme for the Horned Frogs going into this year. Last year, the theme color of the Big 12 was purple. Both purple teams were in the championship game. This year, the Saturday Scholars are over consensus three ways on both purple teams once again. So purple is the theme color. Now it is time to move on to the team out in Lubbock in red and black, the Red Raiders of Texas Tech. Very good season one for Joey McGuire. We were big on that hire from the jump. Xan, take us away on the Red Raiders.
I love Joey McGuire. I mean, that man is passionate. The way he talks to his team, the way he recruits, you can tell that man really wants to build something special in Lubbock. And I mean, I believe him. Look how they're recruiting. They're recruiting at such a high rate. If you look at the recruiting rankings right now and the consistency since he took over, it looks like Tech is going to be a perennial top three team in the Big 12 from here on out. They are doing a great job. Will that be the case this season? They do have a good team, but let's see. Let's look at the team last year. 47th in offensive efficiency, 26th in defensive efficiency, 50th line yards, 63rd sack rate. Overall, a positive 5 TARP rating, which usually means they're going to be pretty good. They bring in Zach Kitley, who was at Houston Baptist, to Western Kentucky, and has had success at both locations as an offensive coordinator. So, I mean, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. I mean, they are just they are hiring great coaches over there. Their hats off to their athletic director. They're doing a great job. They return Tyler Shook, but the thing is, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Whenever he is healthy, he is a pretty respectable quarterback. Baron Morton is another guy that they have in the waiting who has proven that he can be a pretty solid backup option, but he may be the guy in line in the future. I mean, he has had some good games, although overall his stats are more like 1-to-1 on ratios, so he stands to improve there. They lost Donovan Smith to Houston, who we'll be covering later on in this pod, or in part 2, I should say. But one thing I really like is their wide receiver pickup, DeAndre McCray from Austin Peay. He had 1,021 yards and 9 touchdowns. And let's just keep this in mind. The talent discrepancy between Alabama and Austin Peay, he got 12 receptions and 92 yards versus Alabama. So, I mean, the guy's no scrub.
Wow.
He knows how to get open. And not to mention, Texas Tech returns Duran Bradley, who's preseason all first team Big 12 wide receiver. So they definitely got some pieces in the wide receiver room. They have Taj Brooks returning and Cameron Valdez in the running back room. All of their offensive line are relatively experienced upperclassmen, and they also bring in Rusty Stats from Western Kentucky, who is another really good offensive line piece. I expect their offensive line to improve a little bit this year. Now, on the defensive side, they did lose their safety, Reggie Pearson, to OU, which stings a little bit. They lost Marquise Waters, who was great against the run, to the NFL. They did add CJ Baskerville from San Diego State, who's a pretty solid player, and they returned Adrian Taylor Demerson. So those are pretty good pieces that are returning in the secondary. Overall, I think the secondary might take a step back, but not definitively, because there are people who could step up. This is a pretty well-coached team. I do like the Red Raiders, so I think they are at least going to hold to what they were last year, maybe slightly improve or slightly under, but I don't think it's going to be too substantial of a change. They did lose Tyreek Wilson. That's kind of the biggest loss from this defense. We have to point that out, but they added Steve Linton from Syracuse to kind of supplement that loss, but you can't really replace a top 10 draft pick guy just like that. It's kind of difficult. So I do expect there to be a little bit of a loss in production or prowess at that particular level. Now, I would say the defensive line, I would project them as a top 45 defensive line coming into this season. I mean, they were in defensive line yards, they were 34th last year, but they were 125th in passing down sack rate. That's dreadful. They were very bad at getting to the quarterback. Ultimately, I think they can only improve. They returned Jalen Hutchings, their stud nose tackle, who's an absolute run stuffer, and all their projected starters on the D line are upperclassmen, and that usually bodes well for production and improvement. So I do like that a lot about the Red Raiders. Now let's look at their schedule. They're sitting at a line of 7.5. They open against Wyoming. That's a win. They play Oregon at home. Probably a loss, but you know what? The Red Raiders could very well win that game. Do not sleep on that. That is going to be a very good game. I really do think the Red Raiders might be able to shock Oregon. Early season game, catch them napping. Whenever you see these upsets, it's always in the early season. Don't sleep on the Red Raiders, but I do have it chalked as a probable to a loss, though. More likely a loss. I'm going to say they beat Tarleton. They beat West Virginia. Probable versus Houston. I'm going to say probable with favor to win versus Baylor. Kansas State probable. BYU probable. Bye week. They also get a crucial bye week late in the season before they play TCU. So remember, we were talking about how TCU has a nice little advantage getting a bye week before playing Tech, but Tech also has a bye week right before they play TCU. So they both have a bye week to prep for one another. So it's going to be a really interesting game. Tech is at home in that game. I think barring significant injuries, I think Tech has the advantage there. So we'll see. At Kansas, I think they win that one. I have it as a probable, but I like the matchups in that. I think they beat Kansas. UCF probable. At Texas, a probable. I think they could beat Texas late in the year. We'll definitely see. But this is sitting here at a line of 7.5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have four for sure wins. And those probables, if they even go 500 in that, they're well on the over. Give me the over for the Texas Tech Red Raiders.
Xan,
I'm
with
liking them
you.
for 8 to 9 wins.
Xan, I'm with you. I'm over on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Let's give the people in Lubbock something to be excited about. I think that Tyler Shoug's going to have a great year. I think Zach Kitley is what contributes to that. So I'm not just saying that to say it. Zach Kitley has the track record. He got Bailey Zappi. He worked with Bailey Zappi to break Joe Burrow's passing touchdown record. The man is a genius. The man will be a head coach one day. It was an absolute home run hire by Joey McGuire. And just again with the O-line, Rusty Stats, I mean, that was a Western Kentucky guy. You know, he's coming back to reunite with Coach Kitley, as well as Stephen Hamby, the O-line coach, who also came from Western Kentucky. I will say about the O-line, I was able to listen to a little bit of the insiders at Texas Tech, and I'm not trying to call the kid out, but basically at the tackle position is where they see the liability of Caleb Rogers. So they actually switched him and Monroe Mills. So Mills is holding down that left tackle spot while Caleb goes to right tackle. So that's a spot where it could be vulnerable for this team, but it's still going to be a good unit. And then defensively, I just wanted to highlight really the linebackers. You know, I mean, they do lose 2 starters, but again, you know, you've got high expectations for guys like Ty Matthews and Jacob Rodriguez. And there is depth, though a lot of those guys were kind of special team contributors. Also, they did have a late transfer come in with AJ McCarty coming in to help give some more depth at cornerback from Baylor. So I see that as him just following McGuire. So along with Baskerville, they're able to bring in another transfer to give some depth to a unit that more so on the outside may have a little concerns if guys get hurt. But again, like I've said in previous videos, that's football. Going to the schedule, that Oregon game is going to be fun. I mean, I know you got Texas Bama that week, but man, that's game day potential right there. They probably lose, but I don't think they get blown out. And I think if everything goes right, they could win it. So that aside, we're looking at 4-1. I mean, Baylor could be a toss-up, but you probably win that game. Kansas State, that's gonna be an awesome game. It's gonna be one of the games of the year in the Big 12, I think. I could see that as going either way. And then I see them beating BYU. So before the bye week, I got them with 6 wins. And then I just need them to get me 2 between TCU, Kansas, UCF, and Texas. And I think they can. I think they can clip UCF at home. We'll see where Kansas is at the end of the year. Maybe they get TCU off the bye week. So I just think based on how the schedule shapes out for Texas Tech, in addition to the pieces they have coming back, that this team, which I'm going to say right now, yeah, I think this is the dark horse team to make the Big 12 championship. I'm saying it right now, and I'm saying it on the record on this date of July 9th, 2023, around 7:03 Central Time. Texas Tech is a dark horse to make the Big 12 championship. I don't even know if that's a hot take. For all I know, everybody thinks that, but I am absolutely over on these Red Raiders. It's going to be fun times in Lubbock, akin to our good friend, may rest in peace, Mike Leach. I hope they can bring some of that magic back out there for the Red Raiders.
Yeah, Texas Tech. I mean, I do like this team a lot. I do like the dark horse label, but I do have a little bit of reservations. The offense, I think overall it should take a step forward because of familiarity. Second year with offensive coordinator Zach Kittley. You already talked about Kittley, Xan. I like him a lot. Very good coordinator. The main thing for me, I have a little bit of reservations with Tyler Shuck, and not necessarily his performance, but more so his durability. He's never really played a full season as a starter. What does a full, complete, healthy season of Tyler Shuck look like? And if we, and the first question is, will we even get a full season of Tyler Shuck starting? I also cite O-line concerns, Gonzo. I'm with you there. They only returned 51% snap continuity, which is bottom tier. The Power 5 is the third least in the Big 12. So I'm with you there. But I think good offensive coordinators can sort of circumnavigate bad offensive line play. We see Kansas do that last year. So it definitely is possible when you have good play calling and good scheme. The receiver room is just, I love the receiver room so much. It is loaded with depth and experience. So skill position is not going to be a problem. And as far as the defense, I think that it's possible they could take a little bit of a jump into maybe the top 20. I mean, they were 26th in efficiency last year. I don't necessarily think that it's likely, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I think the defense will be pretty similar to last year, even when you lose Tyree Wilson. So here's the thing. Here's the bad news. My numbers have Texas Tech projected at only 6.5 wins. Yeah, I know. I don't like that. And I know I'm a numbers guy, but I'm not a complete robot. I'm overriding my numbers, boys. I'm going over. I'm going over
What?
on 7.5 on
Overriding your
Texas Tech.
numbers? What?
Then we'll override.
And
I
this
That
is
love
doesn't
it.
why.
that doesn't sound like Shoob at all.
I know it doesn't sound like me. This is why. I think 8 wins is very, very possible. I am playing off upside here with my over verdict on Texas Tech. I see a lot of upside with this roster, and I'm sort of hinging my wagon to Tyler Shuck playing a full season and being very good. That's basically it. I'm hitching my wagon to Tyler Shuck, and there are some red flags with the roster, but there's upside there, and I love the coaching staff. Like, when in doubt, I trust a good coaching staff. And that schedule, man, yeah, you mentioned it, Gonzo. Everyone's going to be talking about Texas at Alabama in week 2. This Oregon at Texas Tech game is flying under the radar. Yeah, that could be a game Texas Tech wins. If Texas Tech wins that Oregon game, which I wouldn't be surprised if that happens at all. I mean, hell, that's a Tyler Shuck revenge game right there. I mean, that's awesome. There's a lot of revenge games in this conference this year. I love it. No, I'm very much looking forward to that Texas Tech Oregon game. And if Red Raiders get 7 wins or less, I'm not going to be happy because my numbers said that would be the most likely outcome. But I'm overriding my numbers, baby. I'm riding the Red Raiders to an over here, 8 wins. So third team in a row now that we have consensus over here with the Big 12. Man, this is nuts. There's a lot of overs here. I don't know if this is even statistically possible so far, but I mean, we'll see. We'll see if the unders are going to start coming in here. I can feel them coming. So those red arrows are going to start popping up on the board here. Let's move out to one of the newcomers in the Big 12. Yes, in case you've been living under a rock, UCF is now in the Big 12. They have a win total of 7 wins. A lot of people think that if there's one of the 4 newcomers that's going to make some noise in this conference, it is the Knights. Gonzo, what do you have on Central Florida?
Well, Shoob, you said the unders are coming, and here it is. I am under on the UCF Knights. But let me preface, because most fans will hear that and be like, well, he's a Florida Gator undergrad, and he went to LSU for law school. You've got the UF-UCF rivalry, and then LSU actually beating UCF in a New Year's Six game. But I want to say UCF of the newcomers is the best equipped to handle a Power 5 schedule, Power 5 recruiting. I think it'll take the others a while to get there. So UCF, they've been here, and I think in due time, this is a team that can win this conference and perennially contend. I just don't think that's going to be it in year 1. And this is more a push under. This team could still make a bowl game, and I'll get into that later. But I want to preface that even though I'm going under on the Knights, I do not think they're going to come in and just get whopped every week. They got a great coach in Malzahn. They've got a great returning quarterback. And let me get in while I'm at John Reese Plumlee. I'll never forget what Plumlee did to that 2019 LSU team. I mean, that man was a road runner running over that defense. So he comes back with over 2,500 passing yards, 14 tutties, 8 picks on 63 completion percentage. And I know he had some injury problems last year as well. He's got over 1,000 yards on the ground as well and 12 touchdowns. So there's your supplement for the mediocre passing stats. But here's the thing. If good old John Reese gets hurt, what is Gus Malzahn to do? And that's the big reason why I have them as an under. I mean, they're waiting in the wings for them are USF transfers, Timmy McClain and Gunnar Smith. Now, it's no disrespect. They're D1 athletes. I never came close to being a D1 athlete, but I think the drop off from John Reese Plumlee to these guys is huge. And playing higher tier competition, playing Plumlee's run style, which that's the Malzahn style. He did it in the SEC. He probably did it at Arkansas State. I can't say that affirmatively, but that is his style is a running quarterback. If something happens to John Reese, they are in trouble. In addition, for the run game, they lose Isaiah Bowser, who was just awesome for them and supplied a lot of production. And they'll have two great backs of RJ Harvey and Johnny Richardson. These guys did combine for 1,000 yards last season. Hopefully Gus can rely on them so he doesn't have to run John Reese Plumlee as often as they did last year. With the receiving core, Ryan O'Keefe, that's a big loss. Most of your core is back. Javon Baker comes back. He led the team in receiving last year. Kobe Hudson was a touchdown leader last year. You bring in Corey Gamage. Don't know how you really say that, but I remember his transfer being up in the portal. He was a one spot. I think he was at West Virginia for like 2 seconds and then flipped and came to UCF coming in from Marshall. And then they also bring in Chauncey Mogwood and, UF legend Trent Whitmore for depth on the outside. No, I know Trent didn't do a lot of UF, but maybe going down to Orlando, he'll get more exposure. On the offensive line, I have a little bit of concern. They've only got Tywin Grable and Wilkani Powell. Sorry for I butchered that, but you got Wilkani returning as on the line. And then the transfers. Of their transfers, I really like Bula Schmidt from Fresno State. He's going to anchor that center position. He's got 31 starts in 40 games. I mean, that is an absolute vet and something you need when you're making a conference jump. In addition, you got Marcellus Marshall, who was an all-conference in the American, and him and Adrian Medley are going to battle it for that guard position. And in addition, you bring in a former Crimson Tide in Amari Kite coming in at right tackle. Jumping to the D line now, you're going to have Lee Hunter and Ricky Barbie on the interior with freshman John Walker. He's going to be in the mix, which that's great to have a true freshman already competing for starting reps. And then their linebacking core is going to have another freshman in the mix with Braden Marshall, and he's going to rotate in with Jason Johnson, Walter Yates, and Nick Martinez. And you've also got some transfers with Ryan Davis and Isaiah Paul and Fred Davis coming in from Clemson, who he didn't play a lot at Clemson, but again, that's a good rotation guy. It's a Power 5 transfer. And then this is their, I think, bread and butter from a defensive perspective. It's this secondary. It's a very veteran room. Despite the fact that they've lost 3 guys, what you replace them with is fantastic. Jamaric Morris was a JUCO All-American at Hutchinson and had 5 interceptions last year. In addition, you bring in Jacorian Patterson to play cornerback as well, and he was an honorable all-conference at Middle Tennessee State. Brian George comes in from Texas A&M. He's going to be depth. And then that safety rotation is going to be seniors Dylan Lester, Quad Bullard, and Jarvis Ware, along with transfers Jarrell Wilson and DJ Mask, who are all bringing in experience. So even though you lost some starters, you're bringing in a lot of experience to supplement. And it's crazy. I'm talking to them like this, like I'm high on them on the over, but this is just, I think, me having just a good outlook on UCF in general. Again, just not this year. So let me get into the schedule on why I have them under 7 wins. They'll beat Kent State at Boise State. Probably a win, but could be a loss just because they have to go out there and play them. You're going out to Idaho from Central Florida. They beat Villanova. Kansas State is what a welcome. What a welcome to the Big 12. You got to go to Manhattan and play the defending conference champions. I think Kansas State get some. Baylor, first Big 12 game in the bounce house. They probably get the Bears on that alone. And I mean, they did it when it mattered all those years ago in the Fiesta Bowl. But still, Baylor's a well-coached team, and that could be a fight. I think at Kansas, I think they lose that game, honestly. They get a bye week and then get to go to Norman. Cool experience. Don't think they're going to win that one. West Virginia coming in. They probably beat West Virginia. They definitely beat Cincinnati. Oak State, that's a toss-up. Oak State is a lot better than I initially had thought, and I don't think that's a guarantee by any means. Got to go to Lubbock. I think they lose to Texas Tech, and I think they beat Houston to win the year. So based on what I have as 4 solid wins in Kent State, Nova, Cincy, and Houston, and then with the toss-up games of Boise, Baylor, West Virginia, Oak State, I just don't think that UCF is going to reach 8 wins in their first year as a Power 5 team. But a bowl game, I definitely don't think is out of the realm for this team. But in conclusion, under for the University of Central Florida.
All right, Gonzo under 7 wins on UCF. So few things here with the Knights. They have 2 new coordinators, which I wanted to mention. New offensive coordinator Darren Hinshaw comes over from UAB. Chip Lindsey, he left to go to North Carolina. We covered that on ACC win totals. Remember, this team was 32nd overall in efficiency last year offensively. It was actually a pretty solid offense. I'm a little that's a big red flag for me. I don't know if the coordinator change on the offensive side of the ball, if that's going to be a downgrade. I feel like it kind of has to be. I don't really think how you can replace Chip Lindsey, but just a slight little tick down there. One thing about the running back room, which puzzled me a lot, is like I think RJ Harvey is a massive upgrade over Isaiah Bowser. Think about this. RJ Harvey had virtually the same amount of rushing yards as Isaiah Bowser, and RJ Harvey had nearly half the rushing attempts that Bowser did. So he had the same amount of total yards, but in almost half the attempts. What are we doing here? I don't I don't understand that at all. But that's good that they got RJ Harvey and as the primary back now. And then defensive wise, yeah, it was a mediocre defense last year. 61st was actually a little bit better in efficiency than I thought they were going to be. New coordinator Ernie Sims. He was the co-DC at USF, and USF's defense was nothing special over there, nothing to celebrate. So yeah, I don't know if I'm necessarily high on these coordinator hires. We'll put it that way. I'm not necessarily jumping for joy over these hires. My verdict here is I'm going under, and it's a lean under for me. I'm kind of with you, Gonzo. I think there will be a little bit of an adjustment period here for UCF. I think that offense is probably going to take a step back with a little bit of a transition. Offensive line seems like it's downgrading. Quarterback depth, like you mentioned, is a huge unknown. I mean, what if Plumlee gets hurt? This thing's going to go off the rails pretty quickly. I do like the skill positions, though. Skill positions look good. Defense, below average last year. How much will it improve by? Again, it's kind of hard to say. New DC coming in. It's a big question mark. I have them projected for 7.2 wins, actually. So my numbers are actually high on UCF. I have them for 7.2, which is a little bit of an over here. I will say this. I do like the floor with this team because when you look at the schedule, I like that there are a lot of these home games that are toss-ups like Houston, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Baylor even. I like that those are all at home, which I think helps. But even though I think there's a high floor with this team, I think they probably will get to a bowl game. I got to go lean under here at 7 wins. I don't see them getting to 8. I think most likely UCF will finish with about 6 or 7 wins. And yeah, I mean, if you want to even back it up further to last year, they were 4-1 in one possession games versus American competition last year. So it's not like they dominated the American last year. And if you want to look at the Power 5 competition they played last year, they were only 2-2 versus P5 competition. They beat Cincy and Georgia Tech, but then they lost to Louisville and Duke last year in Power 5 competition. So when it's kind of hard to judge these new teams because you're looking at these numbers and it's like, well, now apply that to a whole nother level up of competition. That's the challenge here with these win totals with the 4 new schools. I'm going to go lean under here with UCF. I'm with you, Gonzo.
I think you guys both bring up really good points about the QB depth. I mean, past John Reese Plumlee, if he gets hurt, I mean, they really are in a very, very bad spot. But I'm operating under the sense here that John Reese Plumlee is going to be healthy. Look, their TARP rating suggests they're going to regress. It's -9, -7 on offense. Yeah, like it's one of the worst in all of Division One football. -9 is atrocious. But I will say this: they did lose their offensive coordinator, sure, but ultimately, I still like the pieces that they have. We did talk about how they lost they lost O'Keefe, good running back. Gonzo alluded to that. But, they also have, good running backs. And they have DeMarcus Bowman, too, someone that we didn't really mention. I do think, despite losing some really good pieces on their own line, I think they did a good job supplementing in the portal. I think they'll have a good or respectable starting unit, but there is concern for depth. I don't know how they would do if they lose a couple guys. They lost their cornerback, Devontae Brown, to Miami, but they did a good job supplementing all those players. And some of their safeties, I really like the safety group that they have. I'm definitely higher on their safety group. I think they'll have a respectable pass defense. I like some of their linebackers. They returned Jason Johnson, who is their best linebacker, and all their other starters are basically seniors. So there's a lot of experience there. They were 56th in defensive line yards and 110th in pass down sack rate last year. So they were not very good at getting to the quarterback. So that's something that they stand to improve on. But they were able to get Sean Peterson, who was FIU's best pass rusher, and he was pretty dang good. And they returned Ricky Barber at defensive tackle as well. So that's something that I like. I think there's some upside for this UCF team, more so than people give credit for. I think Kent State, Boise State, Villanova, I think that's 3-0. Boise State could be a little tricky, but I think overall, from a talent perspective, they have more talent than Boise State, and I think it's going to show. So I do think they will start 3-0. At Kansas State is a dicey game, and as you guys alluded to, welcome to the Big 12. You get to play the former champion in Manhattan. That one is definitely a tough game. It's not one that UCF is guaranteed to lose, though. I think that one is one that I would lean towards Kansas State winning, but I'm not going to say that definitively UCF would lose that game. Baylor is a probable game. I think Baylor, will be an interesting matchup for UCF, and definitely one that can go either way. I think at Kansas, they match up very well from a personnel standpoint with Kansas. Kansas D-line has just been decimated. They're absolutely terrible. They haven't really brought anyone in to make that line any better. UCF has a solid running back averaging 6.7 yards per carry. They have a really mobile quarterback. I think that really poor D-line from Kansas is going to be Swiss cheese. And I think UCF is going to get more stops in that game. So I really like them to beat Kansas. Then bye week, they get to go at OU, but a bye week to prep for OU. I feel like the Big 12 did that on purpose. They're like, hey, OU, screw you. We're gonna we're gonna give them a whole bye week to prep for you. And so I actually think UCF could catch OU sleeping. I think they're one of those teams that could do that. Because think about it this way. UCF is brand new to the conference. They want to prove themselves. They are motivated. They want to punch someone in the mouth, and they get their first shot at one of the big boys before they leave, and they get a bye week to do it. They are going to be pumped, man. They're going to come into that game swinging. And I think there's a chance that they beat OU. We talked about how OU is a 9.5 win total right now, but not by merit of how great they are, but more by merit of their schedule. And I think that's very much a game that UCF could win. West Virginia is always a team that is a little bit tricky. I do like West Virginia's secondary this year, but we will see how that works. And again, by this point, is UCF having any injuries at the quarterback position? That could be a big play in this, but I'm going to go, again, operate under the assumption their quarterback stays healthy. And then at Cincy, I think they win that. Oklahoma State secondary is terrible. I think they win that. Texas Tech, a probable, but I lean to Texas Tech. And Houston, I wouldn't sleep on Houston. I think Houston can upset a lot of teams here and play spoiler to some teams' win totals this season. But I'm going to say this, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 6 games that I'm just giving them right there. And they've got some probables, man. So if they even get one of their probables, I'm at least on push. So I'm pushed to over on UCF. I like 7 or 8 wins for UCF.
All right. Xan is high on UCF. He's got the over 7 to 8 wins. Me and Gonzo under 6 to 7 wins. Yeah, I think I feel like you read my notes there, because I was about to say, before we transition off here to Baylor, that game, October 21st, when UCF goes at OU, when they go to Norman, that's UCF going in to face their former quarterback, Dylan Gabriel.
That's also UCF's Super Bowl, man. Like
Oh,
they get to play
100%.
OU. It's their only chance to play OU before they leave. It's their Super Bowl, man. They want to win that.
Yeah, I actually think the Big 12 got this one wrong. I think the Big 12 should have made OU come to the bounce house. Could you imagine
That would have
if
been
they made
awesome.
OU come to the
They
bounce
should
house
have.
and Dylan Gabriel had to go back to face his former team?
They should have done that.
They should have done that. What were you doing, Big 12? Come on. Like who no, there should have been zero pandering to OU or Texas. It should have been screw you guys. Like we're making you go wherever. Like we
Yep.
don't care. Like we're making this game happen because I feel like that OU and Dylan Gabriel going back to the bounce house would have been phenomenal television. But nonetheless, it is a way, but they're coming off the bye week, man. I had this in my notes. Like, what if guys, if UCF wins that game and they beat Dylan Gabriel,
They're going
like
over.
could you imagine UCF fans, y'all are very loud and like to have your voice heard as is, but if you guys beat OU and you beat Dylan Gabriel in Norman, oh boy. I don't even want to know, man. The hype, it would be out of control. So
We'll see where they're at that point in the season.
yeah, we'll see. But it's just that's one of those games where I'm like, oh boy, if that happens somehow. All right, it's time to move on. We are going pretty long here, but hope you guys are enjoying this in-depth breakdown of the Big 12 Conference. I will lead us off here for the final team of part one, the Baylor Bears, sitting with a win total line of 6.5. Last year, Baylor, man, a little bit of a disappointing 6-7 year, coming off that Big 12 championship in 2021, and they went to the Peach Bowl and beat Ole Miss that year too. A little bit of a down year for Baylor, but it is Dave Aranda's fourth season. I think general consensus, at least this is what I've heard, outside opinion, is that I think a lot of people are expecting Baylor to have a bounce back by default. They're kind of flying under the radar here, it seems like, nationally, but we shall see. Their offense, it was 30th overall in efficiency last year. The year-over-year improvement for the offense, for offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes, who I think is a very good OC, by the way, very impressive in my opinion, because this Baylor offense took a big jump last year, and it was the strength of this team, which was a little surprising if you ask me. Blake Shapen at quarterback returns for his second full season as the starter. Surprisingly, his numbers dipped in 2022 compared to 2021. And I know he didn't fully play a lot in 21. He didn't start in that season, but I was pretty high on Blake Shapen after that 21 season. It was just a little surprising to see his numbers dip, but there is that potential there. There is that upside for Shapen to get back to where he was a couple seasons ago. So let's not leave that out of the realm of possibility here. And the quarterback room, it's got a few transfers underneath him. Out of the room is Kyron Drones. He went to Virginia Tech. In is Sawyer Robertson from Mississippi State and RJ Martinez from Northern Arizona. So Aranda did a pretty good job of bringing in quarterback depth, in my opinion, which I think is a good thing. And as far as the running back room, returns decent experience with Richard Reese, Quaylon Jones, and they also got transferred Dominic Richardson from Oklahoma State. So handful of pretty good players to form a committee there at running back. The wide receiver room, they returned 3 of their top 4 reception leaders from last year. You know, Baylor wasn't really known for their wide receivers, but I kind of like Monterey Baldwin. I think he's a guy that could potentially like take a step forward this year and be like, you know, that alpha wide receiver 1 potentially. I also like that they added Keytron Jackson from Arkansas, and they also brought in tight end Jake Roberts from North Texas. So again, Dave Aranda, I thought, doing a pretty good job in the portal. Not a lot of coaches are really using the portal to full efficiency, but I think Aranda did a great job. And then as far as the offensive line, pretty average to slightly above average last year. They have 56% snap continuity, which is not the greatest, but not the worst. Connor Galvin was a big loss at left tackle, but they got the Barrington brothers from BYU. They got Campbell Barrington, who's a solid replacement, and then they also got Clark Barrington, who is going to be their center. So overall, offensive line, not too shabby in my opinion. And then the defense, man, this was the biggest thing last year with Baylor. An unexpected mediocre year defensively for a Dave Aranda coach team. They were 56th overall in defensive efficiency, which, I mean, all right, that's not bad, but it's, you know, it's not like a good defense last year. Very uncharacteristic setback. And they only returned 5 starters off of last year's defense, which does a little bit, gives you a little cause for concern. Defensive line was, I know they had Siaka Ika, but the defensive line was not good as a whole. They were 95th in line yards. They were outside the top 100 in sack rates. As far as a linebacker room, they have Dylan Doyle, who was a very solid player, but I do like the addition of Mike Smith Jr. that they brought in from Liberty. And then as far as the secondary, I like Devin Lemire, but the rest of secondary is very young and unexperienced. For me, it's actually a pretty big concern. I know Baylor tried to address this in the portal, but there's probably a reason why David Aranda was trying to get in all these guys to cover up the secondary, because I don't really see it as being a very good unit, if I'm gonna, be honest about it. And then as far as the schedule, I have the non-conference play as 2-1 or 3-0. It's really dependent on how you feel about Utah, or if Cam Rising is even healthy by that point in the season. I think most likely Rising is going to play. But if Baylor gets really lucky and Rising isn't healthy, then yeah, I think Baylor's probably good to beat Utah. And then one of the most random FCS scheduling matchups I think I've ever seen. They have the Long Island Sharks coming into Waco, which is just extremely random FCS opponent there.
They
But
need a
anyways,
guaranteed win.
yeah, the LIU Sharks. But anyways, yeah, then you get into Big 12 play. You got Texas coming in. You go at UCF, Texas Tech. I mean, opening up the Big 12 play, not necessarily the easiest draw there. You got a soft spot in the middle of the schedule here with Cincy, Iowa State, Houston, which I like their odds to win all those games. But then you got to go at Kansas State and at TCU back to back. I mean, that's a little tough. So all in all, I'm not really confident in a bounce back from the defense, if I'm going to be honest, which I didn't really think that, because when I went into this breakdown, I thought, I'm liking Baylor a lot. I just think by default, Baylor's going to bounce back, especially defensively. But when you dig in and look at this under the hood, I don't really know if this defense is going to be better than it was last year. I'm not confidently saying that it is. It's still a concern for me, which is just surprising. But all in all, I have Baylor projected for 6.3 wins. 6.3. Boys, I'm overriding that. Once again, I know 6.3 isn't a big difference compared to their line at 6.5. I am going lean over for Baylor. I'm just going to put my trust in Dave Aranda here, and I'm going to say that the Bears can get to 7 wins. I think 7 is a little bit more likely than 6. Over on Baylor.
Baylor does have a +6 offensive TARP rating, which is really nice, but -4.5 on the defense. And as you alluded to, Shoob, my model says regression at all 3 levels. D-line, linebacker, secondary, regression at all 3 levels. I have them as actually being a pretty comparative to the whole Big 12, being at the bottom, like as a whole unit, one of the worst defenses going into this year. They do have Matt Polich, who came in as the co-DC from Oregon, to be the DC. We'll see how that works out for them. You mentioned the wide receivers. I love their running back room. They at least have that going for them. They have Blake Shapen returning. They have returning wide receivers with experience, including Hal Presley, who we didn't really touch up on. They have a lot of really fast guys. So there's a lot of potential for that offense to take another step. So that will be the strength of the Baylor Bears, their offense. But man, it's not going to help you if you can't stop anyone on defense. I love the ads on the offensive line, guys. I think their offensive line is going to take a step forward this year. I think it's going to be better. The Barrington brothers are bona fide studs. They helped BYU have one of the best offensive lines last year. And I mean, I'm definitely interested to see what this offense can do, because I think that gives them a lot of upside. But I can't ignore this, man. Like, their defense, they lost safety Devin Neal. They lost their best safety, Al Walcott, to Arkansas. I mean, they brought Isaiah Dunson in, who's going to play a little bit for Miami, but he doesn't have a lot of production or playing time. Not a very highly rated guy. Don't really know what to expect from him. And of course, we mentioned how their D-line struggled a little bit last year, and they lost Siaka Ika. But they did add Utah State transfer Byron Vaughns, who is a jack of all trades. He's good at all levels versus the run and pass rush and passing. He's pretty good at everything. I think that's a very good addition for them. So they can at least supplement there. One thing about Baylor, they run a 3-4-4 defense. It's very unique, and I actually really like that. I think that's something that kind of plays into the madman that is Dave Aranda. But despite all that, man, when you play in a league, and when I look at my model here, I'm seeing too many quality offenses here for you to have that bad or that much of a regression on defense and be able to stay viable. And I think that's my biggest concern with Baylor right now. Texas State, W. Utah, I know you like to kind of I know Utah has their early season blunders. I don't think this is one of them. I think Utah beats them. LIU W, Texas L. So I think they're starting 2-2. At UCF is definitely tricky. It's winnable, but it's tricky. No guarantees. Then they get Tech. Really tough Big 12 schedule to start, as you mentioned. And then the bye week to prep for Cincy. They should be able to beat Cincy off a bye week to prepare for them. Iowa State is a probable. I lean more towards a Baylor win. Probable for Houston. Probable with Kansas State, but lean to a Kansas State win, especially since they're at home. TCU, I think, is a probable. Remember, they very well could have beat TCU last year if it wasn't for Bazooka. So, I mean, they were very fortunate to TCU was very fortunate to beat Baylor last year. Baylor really had TCU beat. So that's definitely a probable as well. But ultimately, I think they lose that game. And West Virginia, I'll say, is a probable, but a win. For me, I could see Baylor winning 7 games, but like your model, Shoob, mine says 6 wins. I like them for 6-6, and I'm sticking to that. I'm going underneath on the Bears. I think they're a bowl team. I don't think they're a 7-win team.
For year 3 under Dave Aranda, I am going to have faith that good old Dave knows what he needs to correct, and he made those proper adjustments by firing Ronnie Wheat and firing Ron Roberts, and I think bringing in Matt Polage and Chris Robinson to coach the defense, Polage handling the safeties as well, Robertson handling the inside linebackers. I think that these changes in just the attitude that Aranda instills in his boys will help Baylor find a way to hit 7 wins. I'm over on the Baylor Bears. It's a lean over, and for me, it's just scheduling. I think Texas State and LIU are locks. I think at Cincinnati's a lock. Houston, I'm very confident in it. For West Virginia, for all we know, Neil Brown will be fired by then. That's 5 for me. And now it's just, can you get me 2? Can you take care of business and beat Iowa State at home for 6? And then can you find a way to shock one of the Texas schools, beat UCF on the road, or surprise Utah? And I think it's more likely than not that Dave Aranda takes care of his business, that his team takes care of their business, and that they find a way to surprise at least one of these schools to get to 7-5 and keep building on the success that was started 2 years ago.
Yeah, I just want to say about that Utah game. I don't know. I actually think it's a pretty good spot for Baylor hosting Utah in week 2 because let's not forget, Utah has to host Florida in week 1 of the season, and that's a game that Utah lost last year. I'm going to be at that game, by the way. So Utah's going to have to play Florida, get that revenge game, then they got to turn the page, go at Baylor. I mean, that's a tough like non-con to open up the season.
Utah does have a tough schedule. Period. Period.
I think it could be one of those games where it's like you come off the high of playing Florida and then you got to go play at Baylor. I mean, I don't know. I actually like Baylor's odds in that game potentially, but we'll see.
I think Utah is too well balanced both on offense and defense. And when Baylor is only reliant on their offense and their defense has too many holes, I just think you get more stops, you win the game. I like Utah a lot in that game.
Well, anyways, we have a little bit of disagreement here towards the end of the video. We have Xan down on the Bears underneath 6.5. He thinks they're more of a 6-win team. Gonzo and I have 7 wins is more likely than not. So a little bit of disagreement here, but I think general consensus between the 3 of us is that the offense could probably be better, but the defense is a massive question mark. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's something we're missing here. On paper, the defense, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better, but I don't know. Maybe there's something we're missing here.
Aranda is a defensive mind. He is.
That's
so
the biggest
if they're
X
able to right
factor.
the ship, it's Aranda.
Absolutely. Defense is the biggest X factor here. Unless there's something we're missing, we'll see. But Dave Aranda, big coaching job to make, big impression for year 4 of his head coaching tenure in Waco. So that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a very long, very detailed breakdown of the top half of the Big 12 Conference. Leave a comment. Let us know if you're fans of one of these teams, especially. Let us know in the comments how you feel, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree with us. Just let us know. If we missed something, just let us know in the comments. If you're a UCF fan, I'll promise not to call you Central Florida, but I know how you guys are, so we'll see. But Anyways, thank you guys for watching. And if you're a fan of one of the other Big 12 teams, stay tuned for part 2, which will be released very shortly. So that being said, the Saturday Scholars, Gonzo, Xan, and Shoob signing out. See y'all later. Have a great day.